Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at Sony A6700. Sony's APS-C E-mount has been one of the most popular DSLM systems ever since it was introduced, but it didn't always get as much attention as it deserves. I think that the first peak period of APS-C E-mount was in 2017 when the A6500 was released. Sony A6700 finally introduces a new platform based around the new BSI sensor into the A6000 line. What I basically wanted from the A6700 was to provide Sony A7 IV level of technology in the APS-C package, or maybe even something extra on the top of that. In this video we will try to find out whether that is the case. Compact size has always been a big selling point of the A6000 line, and that is also the case with A6700. It is 12.2 cm wide and it weighs 493 grams, including battery and SD card. I will say right away that the size to performance ratio of the A6700 is excellent. The build quality is on par with Sony's full-frame cameras, which means that it is on a very good level. It feels very solid, and the coating on Sony cameras has gotten much better over the years, so that is no longer an issue. The weather sealing should be pretty solid on the A6700. The ports on the side of the camera are nicely sealed, but I have managed not to test that with this review unit. I also appreciate the separate SD card slot. 6700 uses a 26 megapixel backside illuminated APS-C sensor, possibly IMX571 or some evolution of it. This is the first major sensor update in A6000 line since the original A6000. 26 megapixel resolution is completely fine. It is enough for the vast majority of digital publishing and even large printing. It is also a good choice for video features, but we will get to that later. The ISO performance is very similar to other APS-C BSI cameras. As usually, you will get very clean images up to ISO 1600. ISO 3200 is usable in most situations, ISO 6400 is more of an emergency option, and ISO 12800 is useful mostly for documentary purposes. Those values are about one stop behind the full frame, which is not bad, I would say. In terms of the dynamic range, you actually won't see that much of a difference in comparison to the full frame cameras as long as you use low ISO values. For digital publishing, you have a lot of flexibility to use highlights and shadow sliders. The dynamic range is sufficient even for challenging conditions such as sunsets, again as long as you can stay at low ISO values. I am very happy with the dynamic range, and this is one of the areas where BSI design makes a difference. The colors are very similar to other latest Sony cameras. As always, Sony aims for maximal accuracy, and they were successful in that regard. The colors are very neutral, not overly warm or vibrant. It is a good starting point for RAW development. The A6700 can shoot 11 frames per second with autofocus continuous and mechanical shutter in compressed RAW format. Using lossless compression drops that value down to 7 frames per second. Using an electronic shutter makes no difference. The buffer capacity is about 86 RAWs, which is a very good value. These values are fine for intended purposes of this camera, but not particularly impressive, and it feels like Sony is probably not giving us all that they can in this regard. It has one slot for UHS 2 SD card, which is also fine for this category. As I mentioned, I appreciate that it is positioned on the side of the camera instead of battery compartment. The autofocus is exactly what you would expect from Sony in 2023. It uses Sony's latest autofocus system with 759 phase detection points and 425 contrast detection points. It also uses the latest software, which means that it is pretty much flawless. The focus acquisition is instant and it is 100% reliable in any conditions. Backlit subjects and low-light situations are not a challenge for the 6700. That also applies to the eye autofocus and all of the subject detection features. It works great with humans and also with animals, alive or stuffed, it doesn't really care. Real-time IAF also works in video. It is not a new feature, but not everybody is aware of that, so I will mention it here. The autofocus in video works just as well as in the stills mode. A6700 offers 7 steps for autofocus speed and 5 steps for responsiveness, which is called shift sense. These can completely change the behavior of the autofocus. Touch tracking also works very well, which is a big improvement over older Sony A6000 cameras. This autofocus system is pretty close to perfection at current state of technology and therefore a huge strength of the A6700. Continuing with the strengths, we have the video. Sony A6700 can shoot 4K fully downsampled from about 6.2K. Possibly the biggest highlight of this camera is that it can do so up to 60 frames per second with no crop. There still aren't that many cameras that can do that. The video quality in terms of detail is great as expected from fully downsampled video. It looks great with very natural processing and outstanding clarity. Another big upgrade over previous A6000 cameras are the codecs. A6700 can shoot 4K UHD video in 10-bit 422 using all intra or long GOP encoding. In long GOP, it is very manageable 140 megabits per second in 25p and 200 megabits per second for 50p, again in 4K 422 10-bit. 6700 can also shoot 4K 120p with 1.58 times crop. The image quality is a little bit lower but still more than usable, so this is actually a very valuable option. The S-Log3 also works great. 10-bit footage captures plenty of information for expanding the flat gamma curve, which captures a great amount of dynamic range. In my experience with other Sony cameras, S-Log3 is among the easiest to work with, at least for me personally. There is actually a change in the way that you engage S-Log shooting, which is now a tab in the menu. You can still set up S-Log3 picture profile and use S-Log that way. The rolling shutter is exceptionally low. Some outlets have measured it at about 16 milliseconds, which is more than good enough for all-round use, and there is absolutely no need to be concerned about that. The only thing that I miss in terms of the video specs is OpenGate 3x2 video recording, which would be very nice. Other than that, Sony A6700 is a great video camera, there isn't really anything else that I can complain about, especially not at this price point. The in-body image stabilization in the A6700 is rated for 5.5 stops, which is the same as with the A7 IV, but it feels a lot more effective. At 15mm or 22.5mm equivalent, I was able to get half of a second exposures with no issues at all. Video stabilization is also impressive. I have tested it with a 75mm or 113mm equivalent Viltrox AF 1.2, and it worked really well for static shots even at that focal length. Even more impressive is the active mode, which combines in-body image stabilization and digital stabilization specifically for walking. This is actually the smoothest walking footage that I ever got out of any camera by a pretty significant margin. Sony doesn't really advertise this capability, but it is a major strength overall. I'm also happy with the responsiveness and the behavior of the in-body image stabilization, so overall thumbs up for the IBIS. Handling is generally very good, except for one thing. The grip is very well shaped, it is a little bit shorter than on the A7 IV, but I think that most people will be happy with it. The controls are pretty logically positioned. 6700 offers 3 command dials, which is great for this category, and a couple of custom buttons. The famous corner button was also carried over. Fortunately, this one is a lot more difficult to press accidentally than the one on A6500. That one missing thing is the joystick, and I have to say that I do miss it. That is an unfortunate omission in my opinion. On the other hand, there is a dedicated stills/video switch on the A6700, which is extremely important for hybrid users. It allows you to have separate settings for stills and video, which is very useful. The lack of the joystick is partially mitigated by the extended touch functionality. There are these new touch icons on the screen that allow you to change some of the settings. I think that this will be rather useful to people used to smartphone photography. Importantly, it can be turned off if you are more of an old school user. Other than that, it uses the newer version of the main menu introduced with the A7S III and some later additions such as that home screen of sorts. I think that the structure of this menu system is the best of all manufacturers. I do like the submenu system. A downside is that the items are a bit smaller, which is not great for touch operation. The 3-inch display is carried over from the A7 IV. The resolution is 1.04 million dots, which is not great by 2023 standards. In the real world, it is surprisingly fun to use. The brightness and the color accuracy is very solid. The amount of detail also seems fine to me, so it is a lot better than I expected based on that 1 million dot specification. It is a rotating screen, which is what the market demands in this category, so I can't really complain about that. The mechanism is pretty solid as well. The viewfinder uses 2.39 million dot panel with 0.70 times magnification. It is not a particularly impressive EVF, but it is better than what you usually get in this class. Considering the size of the A6700, I would say that it is fine. A6700 is the second A6000 camera that uses NP-FZ100 batteries with 22 mAh capacity. Surprisingly, the CIPA rating is only 580 shots. I don't really know why. In reality, it is much better than that. The battery life is great with 150 minutes of continuous 4K 20p 10-bit recording on a full charge. That is among the best values in the class. Unfortunately, I can't tell you anything about real-world overheating resistance. Instead of that, I can tell you that it works great at -5°C and in heavy wind. A big part of the resurrection of the A6000 series are the lenses. Some of them are not only very good, but they are also good choices of the lenses to provide with consideration of the intended purposes of the system. I've mostly been testing it with 15mm f1.4, 10-20mm f4, and Viltrox 75mm f1.2. Especially the 10-20mm is a very important lens because it is extremely compact, it provides great focal range, and it is more than good enough for content creators in terms of optical performance. When you combine that with the active stabilization on the A6700, you will get a fantastic camera for video blog type of content. E15mm f1.4 is optically very solid, yet extremely compact and bright prime. It is one of my favorite APS-C lenses at the moment. Viltrox AF75mm f1.2 is currently the best APS-C portrait lens that you can buy. It is pretty much perfect in terms of the optical qualities with beautiful bokeh, and it is very affordable. This one is a no-brainer for portrait photographers using APS-C E-mount. The integrated microphone on the A6700 is actually surprisingly good. It is not as good as having proper shotgun microphone on the camera, but for something like vlogs or holiday videos, I would say that it is good enough. To sum up, Sony A6700 is a very successful refresh of the A6000 line. I can say that it finally brings the APS-C E-mount to the technological level of the A7 IV. It uses a very capable sensor with great dynamic range and respectable ISO performance. Importantly, it also allows the 6700 to have great video specifications, including no-crop 4K 60p. Finally. The autofocus is pretty much perfect for both stills and video. The in-body image stabilization is very capable, and the active mode is even more capable, including outstanding walking stability. It is very well made, weather sealed, and the size to performance ratio is excellent. There are just 3 things that I miss on the A6700. The joystick, open-gate 3x2 video recording, and possibly a bit higher continuous shooting speed. Despite that, it is a great package. I can easily recommend the A6700 for any kind of social media content creation. It is pretty much ideal for that. I can also recommend it to a lot of photographers and filmmakers because it is a very capable device. I can also say that the APS-C E-mount is back and the A6700 is finally a worthy successor to the A6500. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.